For I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. The former things shall not be remembered or come to mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For I am about to create Jerusalem as a joy and its people as a delight. I suspect that it may have been hard for many, if not all of you, to hold on to these words of promise in our reading from Isaiah as you listened just now to our gospel reading from Luke, with its language of wars and insurrections, earthquakes and famines, plagues and portents in the heavens, arrests and persecutions, betrayals and death. A gospel written to folk in the late first century when the temple and the city of Jerusalem lay in ruins, destroyed by the Romans after a Jewish rebellion. A time when Christians were experiencing persecutions and family divisions because of their faith. Yet they were also avidly awaiting the hoped-for promised return of Jesus. When Jesus and his disciples were wandering through the temple precincts, the disciples would have looked around in awe. The temple looked solid. It was well constructed. It was grand. Indeed, if reports are true, Herod's temple had been one of the great wonders of the ancient world, and it was as much a monument to Herod's vision of grandeur as it was a place of celebration of God's presence. Still, it would be hard to imagine its destruction. Having been to places like Westminster Abbey, a church that has existed for more than a millennium and continues to serve as a place of worship, it's hard to imagine its demise. Yet we who watched the Cathedral of Notre Dame burn this past spring know that it is possible, and that is what happened to the temple. Jesus warned his disciples that a time was coming when this grand building would come tumbling down. And of course, there would be false messiahs that would offer a more positive spin on things. They would come claiming to represent God's vision, but their promises would prove to be hollow. Indeed, they were simply seeking power and glory and not the will of God. For us, the language of this passage is challenging with its apocalyptic themes and imagery. Language about the end times when God's reign will be revealed in all its awe and glory. And while the modern popular religious culture has taught us to think of these apocalyptic passages as predictions, if not an outright roadmap of what to expect in the end times, that's not the way such passages functioned for those who first heard Luke's gospel. Apocalyptic passages were offered to help believers struggling from oppression and persecution put their struggles into the larger context of the universal struggle between God and the forces of evil. By doing this, they provided comfort that no matter how difficult things became, God would not abandon them, and that God would ultimately prevail, thereby encouraging believers to persevere in the meantime, and indeed to witness to their faith in times of persecution. One of the major themes of Luke's gospel is God's compassion. He writes again and again of Jesus reaching out to the poor and marginalized, those in society with no power or position. These passages, which we find so hard to hear as meaningful for us, were to the hearers reminders that even though Jesus was no longer with them, that same compassionate God, though unseen, was with them in all their struggles. And we too live in this meantime, this time between Jesus' resurrection and ascension and his coming again. Yet our experience in this time and place is very different. None of us, I expect, experience persecution because of our faith, Yet there are Christians in different parts of the world who are persecuted, while here it is more likely our Jewish and Muslim brothers and sisters who encounter prejudice and at times persecution. We are living in a time when there is famine in large parts of the world and hunger and homelessness here in our midst. We hear of devastating fires raging in California and unprecedented flooding in Venice and other places. Economically and politically, we are more divided than ever, and it can be hard to listen to the news or follow the nearly unprecedented impeachment hearings or know how to talk to folk whose views are different from our own. We can feel at a loss at how to make a difference as the reality of climate change becomes increasingly evident. We face also asylum seekers turned away from our borders, of families split up if they do make it across, and of those who die trying to reach a haven of safety. In the midst of all that, our challenges as Christians are different from those early members of Luke's community. Our culture, especially here in the none zone of the Northwest, the part of the country where the largest segment of the population has no religious affiliation, as in entering none on a form, isn't hostile to the Christian faith. It's indifferent. At one time, we had a culture that supported congregational participation. I grew up in a state with blue laws, limiting what businesses and shops could be open on Sunday. No one scheduled soccer games or rowing regattas on Sunday mornings or thought of heading for the mall. That support has withered. We are more than ever a multi-faith and no-faith community. Folk not only find other ways to spend their time, but also other narratives to give their lives meaning. Many don't see the connection between the faith we talk about on Sundays and their day-to-day lives the rest of the week. In this season of the year, as the Sundays after Pentecost come to an end and we approach the season of Advent, a season blissfully ignored by the culture around us, where the shops have been displaying Christmas items since moving Halloween candy off the shelves, our Sunday readings serve to reinforce the fact that we are living in this meantime. They serve to remind us that we are awaiting Jesus' return, even as we look to the season of anticipating his birth again into our midst. Next Sunday, we celebrate the feast of Christ the King on the last Sunday after Pentecost. Yet our gospel reading will be of the crucifixion, reminding us what kind of king we have, not one who lords it over people in a show of power, but who came among us to live and die as one of us, one of the least of us, and yet our God with us, strong to save, as our Navy hymn reminds us. As you approach this coming season of active anticipation, how do you plan to use that time? How will you choose to testify as Jesus invites to this faith that sustains you? Jesus, in our passage, urges the disciples to endure and to witness. He urges them to stand fast because the times of trouble are at hand. Stay true to your faith because it will get challenged. We too can stand firm because the Spirit of God is with us, giving us the strength to stand and the words to speak when required. To live in this meantime fully present to the people and situations around us. Advocates as Jesus was for those on the margins, for justice and truth, and bearers of the good news that God is indeed with us. So perhaps our response to the exhaustion of our current political season, any uncertainty about the economy, concerns for an endangered environment, and a host of other things afflicting us might be to sing words of joy, thanksgiving, and praise. For God is still at work, both in us and through us, for the health of this world, which God loves so much, and that is cause for rejoicing. As Isaiah told us in our canticle, make his deeds known among the peoples. See that they remember that his name is exalted. Sing the praises of the Lord, for he has done great things, and this is known in all the world. Cry aloud, inhabitants of Zion, ring out your joy, for the great one in the midst of you is the Holy One of Israel.